Hey, have you ever thought about how one tiny change in the past could just totally rewrite everything we know? Well, today we're jumping into a huge thought experiment. We're going to explore one of the biggest what-ifs in Japanese history and see how the world changes because of it.
So, here's our big question for the day. What if we could reach back in time and just erase one single infamous act of treachery? What would that do to Japan? And, more importantly, how would those ripples spread across the entire globe? Okay, so the event we're wiping from the timeline is the Honnoji incident. The year is 1582. Oda Nobunaga, this brilliant and ruthless warlord, is this close to finally unifying Japan after a century of constant war. But then, boom, his most trusted general, Akechi Mitsuhide, turns on him. Nobunaga is cornered, and he's forced to take his own life. That one betrayal, it changed everything.
Right, so let's hit the rewind button and stop that betrayal from ever happening. Nobunaga lives. And just like that, Japan is on a completely different path. Let's dig into the first, most immediate consequences.
You can see the split right away. In our real history, Nobunaga's death created a power vacuum. Hideyoshi filled it, then Tokugawa, who eventually slammed Japan's doors shut to the world. But in our new timeline, Nobunaga finishes the job himself. There's no disastrous invasion of Korea. Instead, he's looking out at the ocean, focused on trade and keeping Japan open for business with the West. It's a totally different country.
So what does this new Japan actually look like? What kind of nation does this ambitious, forward-thinking unifier build? Nobunaga's Japan would have been incredibly modern for its time. We're talking a strong central government with these pro-business policies called Rakuichi Rakaza. Basically, he created free markets by smashing old monopolies. He loved Western tech, especially guns, and his whole outlook was pointed outwards, towards the sea. His foreign policy wasn't about some grand ideology. It was all about what worked, what was practical, and what made Japan stronger.
And that leads to the next huge question, right? A powerful, unified, trade-hungry Japan isn't just going to sit at home. It's going to look for opportunities. So where does it go? The answer to that sends shockwaves across the whole continent. And you know, the first and maybe the biggest shockwave is actually what doesn't happen. For China's Ming dynasty, Nobunaga staying alive is an absolute godsend. They basically dodge a world-ending bullet they never even saw coming. Just look at this chain reaction. It's a perfect domino effect. 1. Nobunaga lives, and he's a traitor, not a conqueror. 2. So that brutal invasion of Korea that happened in our timeline, it's off the table. 3. This saves the Ming dynasty, who were allied with Korea, an unbelievable amount of money and soldiers. And 4, they can now use all those saved resources to deal with the real threat to their existence, the growing Manchu tribes up in the northeast. The Manchu conquest of China? It might have been stopped dead in its tracks.
But here's the thing about history. You solve one problem, and you just create a new one. With Japan's ambitions pointed out to sea and the Ming dynasty still holding strong, the whole chessboard is reset for a brand new, high-stakes clash of empires. The entire focus of conflict just pivots. Instead of a bloody land war over Korea, Japan's gaze shifts south, to the sea, eyeing the incredibly strategic island of Taiwan. And for the Ming? Well, they might have solved their Manchu problem, but now they're facing a completely new kind of threat from two directions at once.
Suddenly, the Ming dynasty is caught in this massive strategic pincer. From the north, you've got the Russian Empire slowly, relentlessly expanding across Siberia, creating a whole new threat on land. And from the south, it's a naval free-for-all. You have Nobunaga's powerful Japan, plus European powers like Spain and the Netherlands, all scrambling for control of the sea lanes and for a piece of Taiwan.
So how in the world does the Ming dynasty deal with this nightmare scenario? Well, believe it or not, there was a brilliant, almost modern solution on the table, but it was a solution their entire system was built to reject.
The idea was actually pretty simple, and to a European at the time, it would have made perfect sense. You let private companies, armed merchant fleets, defend the seas. You empower them to fight pirates, the Japanese, the Europeans, and they pay for it all with the profits from trade. You basically create your own Dutch East India Company.
It sounds great, right? But it was a complete non-starter. Why? Because the Ming system was its own worst enemy. The government was built on a Confucian ideology that looked down on merchants. They were terrified of anyone outside the government having military power, and the bureaucracy was so rigid and corrupt, it would rather see the empire burn than try something radical that might threaten its own power.
So, Because the Ming couldn't adapt, this new pressure from both land and sea would have likely sent China hurtling down one of several very, very dark paths.
Let's just run through the possibilities, and none of them are good. You could have a total collapse, with China breaking apart into feuding warlord states again. Or maybe a radical revolution, fueled by Western ideas and weapons from the coast. A third option, and maybe the most plausible, is that China gets carved up like a pie. Russia props up a puppet dynasty in the north, while Japan and Europe colonize the rich southern coast. And the final path? A slow, painful rot into a semi-colonized state. Basically what happened to the Qing dynasty just a couple hundred years earlier.
Okay, let's pull back from the fates of these huge empires for a second and zoom all the way in. In the middle of all this chaos, what happens to that island at the center of the storm? What becomes of Taiwan?
It would have become one of the most interesting places on Earth, a true crossroads. You'd have the island's own indigenous peoples, waves of Chinese refugees fleeing the collapsing mainland, ambitious Japanese traders and masterless samurai, and of course, European colonists, the Spanish, the Dutch, all jammed together on one island, all fighting and trading and trying to build a future. It would have been an unbelievably vibrant and probably violent melting.
And all of this entire cascade of events, brings us to one final thought. Following that one thread, from a single betrayal in a temple in Kyoto to the fate of all of Asia, it shows you that history isn't just a list of things that happened. It's this incredibly complex, dynamic puzzle. And, as the source material for this explainer puts it, look closely and think carefully.